was the process of, you know, analyzing or doing functional assessment of human behavior. I hope that you also recognize that, you know, what we're talking about is, you know, human behavior in general, not specific to people who, you know, are labeled or have a diagnosis. It's all of us. So regardless of how we take this information to apply it to the people we support, it also is very applicable to ourselves. And, you know, the other people we come in contact on a day-to-day basis. So it's not really unique or mutually exclusive. So what I was hoping to get to last week or last Wednesday, but we didn't quite cover, was the stress cycle. And as you remember, I was you know, shaking my Pellegrino.
Zac, you muted yourself.
All right. Did you hear me the whole time, or did it just?
It was muted.
Oh, grand. So we were going to cover the stress cycle, and I was talking about the Pellegrino and using it as an example. Is as you add stressors to your day, eventually something's going to open it up, or something's going to set off those stressors. So this is a visual example of that process. But the irony was, when I went to open the Pellegrino that I shook, it was perfectly fine, you know, a day or two later. So that is pretty telling about, well, if you can allow stress to dissipate through whatever means necessary, it doesn't have to explode. So if I just waited to address it a day or two later, okay, well now, you know, not only as an example, my emotions are calm and my decision making is better, but the Pellegrino itself was not something that was going to blow up in my face. And I must say, I tried to do that just because I wanted to see if it would really. I knew if I put it back in the fridge and someone else grabbed it, I'd be in trouble. So if you look at the stress cycle here, here's a diagram of where we start, and everyone has their own baseline. Now your baseline, although there's a variety of percentages, this is just one example. We're taking in about 80%, and a lot of things are actually just voluntary. So we're making decisions, we're processing through. It's not often as stressful because this is our calmest point of the day. We're just kind of even keel. The experience that many people have, though, is if they experience crises or a number of setting events, as we were talking about Wednesday, their baseline rises. So where they're at is not going to be as low as maybe this red line demonstrates. So if you experience ongoing crisis experiences, ongoing setting events, we'll take that red line up 3 notches and realize that's where they're living every day. So if that's the case, when that trigger happens, it doesn't take as much to set people into a crisis experience, whatever or however they demonstrate that, however they experience that. So when the trigger is that biological chemical hardwiring, right? So historically, we would talk about the general adaptation syndrome, or what we call fight, flight, or freeze. And there is always an alternative, and it's self-control. The problem is a lot of people have to go through a ton of experiences of fight, flight, or freeze to develop the skills for self-control. I often share that, you know, my startle response was killed a long time ago. So when you work in a lot of crisis environments, you tend not to get shocked, startled. You don't jump anymore. You don't flinch anymore. And I don't know that that's a good thing. It's just kind of a deadening of that crisis sense. You realize that your responsibility to it is to maintain yourself so that you can help the other individual. So although it's helpful and sometimes necessary, I don't know that it's great for mankind, shall we say. I don't know that that's something that really we should have to experience. And I'm sure many of you have experienced that in your lives, in experiencing a lot of crisis with the person you support or care for. So as that trigger happens, you notice that a lot of our processing starts to fail. So our ability to voluntarily make good decisions. So it goes from 80%, 75 on up. as we escalate, as physiologically the cortisol and the adrenaline are inhabiting our blood flow and our system, so that instead of making good decisions with our brain, we're making more decisions with our motor, with our large muscles. So that's where you determine, do you need to run? Do you need to fight? Or are you just frozen because you can't process any longer? When we and the individuals we support get into crisis mode, we're no longer really thinking. So in our context, we make really horrible decisions. We don't know, we run out of tools. We scream, we cry, we run, we go into our own panic mode, often along with the individual we love. So they're in a process of, they may engage in running away or self-injury or aggression or tantrum and crying and all of the things that shut their system down too from being able to process and to really answer their own needs, or to successfully communicate. So Wednesday, when we were talking about functional alternative behaviors, learning how to communicate as you escalate, and learning how to communicate when you're in crisis. Commonly, those communication tools go to a very primitive place. Your language choice, if you have it, is hard to come by. Your tone changes. So that's why people yell and scream and get upset, is because they don't even have the ability to regulate their tone or volume any longer. For those who don't have language, well, then they tend to use much more large muscle movements. They tend to start moving rapidly, pacing, banging on things, flapping, head banging. I mean, you can add any physical motor aspect you want in there, and any attempt to communicate, as we talked Wednesday about that ladder of dangerousness. So if you look at the red line, that's your ladder. Your ladder just keeps going up and up and up, and thus your communication gets more and more extreme. When either you unfortunately start to experience exhaustion, or some things start to be resolved for you, well, then you start going through de-escalation. So as de-escalation occurs, I don't know why I've got any kind of noise on my phone. De-escalation occurs, things start to calm down. You're hoping there's some resolution, but sometimes it's just exhaustion. And so where you see at the bottom, the post-crisis drain, that often is demonstrated in a lot of self-negativity, negative self-talk, thoughts, depression, when you see this in a very common cycle. So now it's not just a moment, now it becomes a lifestyle, to where you experience, the mental health diagnosis. So what I see, this combination occurs, this is where you get a lot of the comorbidity of, an intellectual diagnosis as well as a mental health diagnosis. Because if your intellectual diagnosis impedes your ability to communicate and get your needs met, then you commonly experience a mental health diagnosis of separation anxiety, depression. You name it. Anything can come out of that because they're not getting their needs met. And Liz, if you don't mind, you pointed out earlier that if an individual has some change in their relationships, and they experience crisis because the routine around that relationship is so strong that is their potentially one and only support system, well, then you see really extreme experiences or even crisis experiences within the post-crisis drain as well. So then that starts to last. So not only do you see the crisis in the moment, but you also see the crisis and the drain going on, and the depression going on, and the fear of that very important person leaving. So it becomes even more essential then for that individual to know every minute of their support person's schedule. And they start to test that schedule. They start to validate that schedule. And every time there's a change to that relationship, they have to start over in that reassessment of that relationship and that person's schedule for that level of predictability. So what we're going to get into a little later is how COVID has really impacted all of us on top of this kind of lifestyle that we were already in. It's just really magnified that. So now, of course, obviously, we want to get back to stabilization. I think the misnomer here on this diagram is that stabilization, if this sequence of events happens over and over and over, stabilization becomes much higher, thus raising your baseline, thus increasing the frequency at which you're triggered. Because your stabilization level is no longer as low as it once was. So if I put it in my perspective, my stabilization being on a beach in the tropics with, the ocean roaring and a good book and my sunglasses and a nap, well, I can get back to baseline, meaning my personal baseline, much more quickly than I would get living the same life in the same house with the same people and the same, difficulties, where eventually I can let that trauma go, as long as I know that there's a duration of time for which I don't have to experience it. But again, I think I said Wednesday, these are not things you get over, these are things you get through. So you have to find these ways for which to reach stabilization. Likewise, you have to help the individual you support get there as well. And everybody's needs are unique and different within categories. So all of our categories are the same, but the individual needs within those categories that we'll be talking about today are unique. So let's move on to the next slide. So this is how the crisis cycle then is demonstrated. And then Wednesday, when I put up the competing behavior diagram and we talked about presets, setting events, triggering events, problem behavior and the maintaining outcomes, all of those support structures we put in place for each individual category. So this next slide, the crisis cycle, will help you to visually see then where these categories would be of support. So in your proactive plan, which would be related to the presets, meaning this is who the person is and the things we're doing for that person just because of what they've experienced in life and the diagnoses they have and their communication skills and their environment that they live in and the structured supports that they require as a result. So we've got to be working that proactive plan as much as we have, mental brain power. I always match it up and say 80% of our support with the individual has to be in the proactive. That's how we're going to support that stabilization. If we're doing most of our work in the reactive, just waiting for something to trigger them, we're going to be really disappointed in the long-time outcomes.
There's a question in the chat box. Sorry for interrupting. It says, are nightmares common with ASD and how can you address them? My son has had them for years and I feel they could be contributing to mental health issues.
Nightmares, again, my opinion is nightmares come in many, many different shapes and sizes for different people. I think that the challenge is when I think of, autism spectrum disorder, it's hard for me to say the commonality because I do work with so many people who couldn't communicate about, what I often refer for kids as pictures in their head or movies in their head. Because using the term nightmare isn't always something they understand. So first of all, you want to quantify with the individual what it is that you're talking about. If they use the term nightmare, that's great. But often we're working or supporting people that don't understand even the concept of nightmare. So you have to take it into a reality context and apply it to what they perceive when they're not conscious. So, and those things also happen when they're awake. So I see it more as a commonality with the anxiety related to autism than I see it with autism. Meaning, a lot of individuals who also have the diagnosis of anxiety disorder, again, mental health disorder, as you're noting there, what happens is the nightmares, I call them the fears and the unsorted thoughts, will come to fruition at night because they don't know how to deal with them in reality. So things that are undone or unaddressed, unsorted, and confusing, those things occur often in nightmares for all of us, not just people on the autism spectrum. Nightmares in and of themselves, I think what you treat as the anxiety and the fear. And unfortunately, a lot of people who experience autism, we're not talking about an affect to their intellect. So they're absorbing and taking in a ton of information, and yet don't know how to ask about it, process about it, and maybe don't have the professional strategies to deal with the anxiety. It's rare for me to find or meet someone who experiences autism who doesn't qualify for anxiety disorder. That would be the rarity for me. So
with Rets, you also have that during the day in a different form. With the Rets and the autism together,
right.
You can see the little Rets girl look at you terrified because something is going through her head and she doesn't understand it. And she's screaming and saying, looking at you, please help me. So yes, it's anxiety in the day and the night, in my opinion, of what picture is going through their head. And how do we figure out that picture? How do we know? They can't tell you.
Right. And that is figuring out the communication systems, but also we have to do a bit of what I call guesstimation. When you know the individual and you know what they've experienced, say that day, that week, that month, that year, and how that applies to their life, and looking at the triggers in the environment. So if you know their presets, then you're going to be more aware of what might trigger them. And those triggers are commonly the recollection, the reminder of whatever it is based on the anxiety that causes, whether you want to call it day or nightmares, that I witness. And again, like I said, it's hard for me to even name one person that I've worked with that doesn't experience anxiety.
Yeah.
I just don't know that person. I would love to, I hope I can think of a name someday, but I, off the top of my head, certainly can't. And I see the question in the chat box, would I recommend cognitive behavior therapy? Yes, absolutely. If in some context, the challenge is you have to meet the individual where their communication level is. And a lot of professionals who utilize cognitive behavior therapy don't necessarily support a lot of individuals with limited language. So, but it can be done. So you just do it more routinely, visually, and you commonly train the people that love and support them rather than the clinician.
Yeah.
So the clinician aids the support people in providing the supports around the cognitive behavior therapy. So I find, depending on the person's ability for language, commonly the clinician needs to train the support people who understand their language. And then we get back to the individualization of the tools used to support them. So, but 100%, CBT is 100% utilized in everything I do. It's a must. So, I'm sure there's a handful of people that it hasn't been real effective for, but again, if you overlook it, you're probably doing them a disservice. So that's helpful? Good. Anything
How do
else?
you do CBT with nonverbal people that are in there, because she looks at you? I know she's in her head.
Yep. Well,
but do you do pictures and talking, or how do you do that?
And it depends on the media form that person's most interested in, because you can do, social videos, songs. I mean, stories. In fact, there's a slide I put in here that I created for this particular presentation that's going to address exactly that.
Okay.
So, yep, like I said, if this is what you came for today around COVID and around, supporting individuals with anxiety and all that, that's what we're doing. Yep, you come to the right place today, because that's what we put together for you. So just getting back to the crisis cycle and how that works with the plan is then you have that reactive plan. And I try to put maybe, 10% of my work into the reactive plan, which is really about redirecting that individual who's, potentially moving to crisis to get them back to the proactive plan. So if your proactive plan's effective and you've got the strategies in place that work to them to support their lifestyle and their behavior and communication and sensory issues, etc., then the reactive plan is just the redirection and the brake systems and the timers and the things that provide them the support for which to calm down before they get to crisis. And the communication systems that aid them as they start to lose whatever language they use. If you get into crisis, the plan is health and safety. There's no teaching during crisis. There's only exacerbating crisis if you do it wrong. Yeah. So to me, it's health and safety and comfort and protection and nurturance and getting them back to baseline as soon as I can. I've always been one to, just because you're in crisis, doesn't mean you're a bad person. So why would I stop offering you supports? Why would I stop offering you food, water, sensory objects, locations that are pleasing to you? I think we often, again, when we run out of tools, we put people in crisis into very sterile settings, or we remove the things from them that are comforting people, safety devices. I think historically, again, this is just my opinion, I think we've used the opposite strategies of isolation and those kinds of things, when I think that sets them up for low self-esteem and common failure in their head. So they start to realize that we are not what's going to save them. We are not the person that can be trusted to get them through what it is that they need. Now, granted, I think I said Wednesday, as long as they're still hitting me, they still believe in me. That's reality. Once they ignore me and start hitting themselves, and once they perceive that I'm no longer a viable support, that I don't get it, that's when they stop targeting me. That's when they stop addressing me. When they see that I am a valuable person, they come to me for which to get their needs met, rather than avoiding me when they have needs. So kind of like the punishment police system that we were discussing on Wednesday. If I put them in isolation and avoid them, well, then they more likely see me as a punisher than they see me as a support person. So it doesn't mean I'm going to stop giving them supports. I'm just needing them to communicate effectively so I can start giving them what they truly need and get the answers to whatever is really causing their crisis. And that being said, that's hopefully that they have a good proactive plan in place so that these are more isolated incidents. If they're in crisis all the time, well, we really have to maintain health and safety and really put a proactive plan in place to where we're creating a life and a lifestyle environment, et cetera, that's much more calming and comfortable for them, not overlooking, of course, medical concerns. When you get into the recovery plan, de-escalation and recovery, again, my theme is the same. I call it debriefing without blame. I want them to know that, I'm still here and our relationship is still sound, and regardless of what happened or where we've been in this last time period, I'm still here to help you, and we're still going to move forward, and, we can recover together. However, that's when maybe we need a break. That's when maybe, I give you more space. So I may not need to observe you for a while right there, but I'm always going to tell you exactly, or show you, I should say, exactly when I'll return. So there has to be the honesty and the truth and the confirmation within these processes for people to trust us and realize that we're the best people for them, and that we bring those people with us to support them. So, because a lot of their relationships are built off of their prime support people. So if you trust them, they're more apt to trust that person, or at least give them a chance. But their assessment skills often are better than ours. So their first 30 seconds to 5-minute assessment tends to be better than mine. So I do trust their opinions most of the time over my own. So they do it for a living, or should I say to live, and I do it for a living, right? I assess people for my own comfort, but not because I live in crisis. They assess people to prevent crisis. They assess people because they have more risks than I do. So it's only natural that a lot of the individuals I know are operating in more of a context of protection and safety than I might be doing on a minute-by-minute basis during the day. So when you don't have the ability to tell everybody what you're experiencing or your opinions of what you think of that person, you're going to be more cautious. Where when a new individual leaves, Brenda and I may, sidebar and say, well, what did you think? and have that conversation about them and give details. And so if they don't have that ability, then they have to be much more protected. There's definitely a larger wall, but they also, again, I'm speaking in generalities and I apologize. But there's also a bigger wall of protection up, hopefully, for necessary reasons. So any questions on the whole plan process? Again, you're front loading the proactive. So when I write a positive behavior support and intervention plan, I'm writing a ton in the proactive. And often when you're using a document that's going to follow the individual from environment to environment, and you may not have all of the luxuries and time to teach people about the plan, well, then you have to be pretty explicit in writing it. So it doesn't have to include what, it also has to include why. So, and that's a commonly overlooked part of the process. You write the what, and people easily disagree with what, but it's hard to disagree with why. So usually that means, well, why? Well, because you know them better. Why? Because you've done all of this. So Cindy, the diagram is a piece of art in our house. I love it, Cindy. Awesome. I should probably frame it in my own. I see it in my head, however. So, okay, if there's no questions, let's move on to the next slide. So behavior support plan, some of the things we want to make sure we're doing is developing a good understanding of the individual being supported and what works. So that's the key is, when you have someone who's supported by a multitude of different individuals, they don't necessarily know that person. It takes a while to get to know them. So the plan should also give a good understanding of who they are and where they came from, a good explanation of the presets. Once I trust someone with someone that I care about, then I can give them more background detail about why they do what they do, because some of the information is intimate. Some of it is, things that, parents don't want in a support plan right away. But once you trust the person, they really do need to know that in order to be respectful and kind and understand the true person that they're, taking the time to get to know. So set up and adapt the environment for success. I know that I think I put it in the slide later is the thing you have the most control over is your environment. It often doesn't feel like that, but it's true. So as long as we're willing to adapt and willing to negotiate and willing to make change, and hopefully you'll get to change back in the future, but that may not be the case. So when you're setting up an environment for that person and not for yourself, that's the challenge, is the emotional attachment to the things, the emotional attachment to, if I think about my clutter and my, sentimental values and all the things that I have, that sometimes I have to detach from that and put it in a box for a while and try to make sure that the environment's really focused on the support and the communication and all of those things if that person's in crisis. Identify behaviors that need work. So prioritize, make sure that everybody's on the same page, so that, and realize that you're not going to target every little detail. You're working on the, you start with the big picture and then find the detail within the big picture. So it's not just, I'm working on hitting in general. I'm working on hitting in a specific context, say hitting to get out of the bath, hitting during transition to get in the car. It's specific. It's not the generality. So that's how you target these behaviors, because they're not. They may have been a behavior that's generalized, but the reason may be different. So if you don't treat the outcome or the reason why they're doing it, and change that support based on the context in which they're using that behavior, well, then you're probably not going to have a lot of success in every context. You might have success in one, but you might be disappointed in the others, and it's going to feel like you're not really experiencing change. Identify the triggers. Obviously, there's a list of things that are triggers for all of us that we know about ourselves that will set me off every time. But most often it's an accumulation of those setting events. It's just the magnitude of things that happen on any given day. So sometimes you have to target the parts in your life that are the setting events, or the parts in their life that is the setting events. And some of those triggers will also dissipate, meaning that it won't always set them off, or it won't set them off to the same extreme. So you'll start to see maybe they don't reach crisis. Maybe they're more redirectable because you've done some of the quality of life things and the environmental things in the proactive plan. Watch for the beginnings of problem behavior. So it's really interesting that often we miss the initial signs because of life. I like to say, because life happens and we don't, 24/7 observing a person is not, what we do, nor what they want us to do. So watching for those beginnings becomes tough. So I encourage everyone to, if you're experiencing a pattern of behavior in a certain context, slow down and watch that context. Watch that pattern. If it's transitioning to the car, watch that pattern. Don't rush to get yourself ready and then, wonder why it happened. Slow down, get yourself ready long before, and figure out what it is that they need in that transition, or what they're trying to communicate in that transition. So once you slow down and observe, every one of you is a behavior specialist. But the problem is we don't have the ability in life to slow down and observe. So, and if that's the case, well, yeah, then you need to ask somebody to come do it while you're in the midst. Because what someone else sees is going to be unique to what you experience in the moment, because you live the life. It's just like watching a movie. You can observe more in someone else's movie, even if the movie's about you, because you don't actually sit down and watch you. So, and then of course, identifying what to do. So let's go to the next slide. This has been one of my favorite things for a long, long time, is that kind of how the process has transitioned. So originally we had IEPs, ISPs, IFSPs, and all sorts of acronyms that you might be annoyed by this time in your lives. But that to me was like a primitive compass. It gave you as much information as go north. Often it didn't give you the detail of who is the person and what have they experienced and what do they really need and why. It just had goals. And a little, how many of you are going to write a book about yourself or your child that includes a paragraph? And that's the reality of most of those documents. Present level of performance. It's like, well, that's not who they are. So think of it as north. So when you read a document like that, an individual support plan, etc., think it's just trying to point you in a direction. But it's definitely not going to get you there. Now, when you hold on to that compass, now you're starting to look at the functional assessment and the positive behavior intervention and support plan. That's more like a roadmap, right? But it doesn't tell you where every tree is. It doesn't tell you where the best place to get gas is, the best restaurant, the best people. It doesn't tell you really anything but go this route, take a left there, turn right on this highway. And that's what most of our, positive behavior intervention support plans look like. Well, ironically, today we use GPS. Take a left at the light. right? I mean, it tells you in 600 feet. Now, that's what we need for our, the people we love and support. And so to me, we have got to that place in how to get from A to B on a road. But we've got to get closer to that with the people that we love and support. When this happens, you have to do this, this, and this in this order. That's the kind of detail I think is best practice. Now, I know it's time consuming, but for a lot of the complex individuals I know, they need something like that in almost every context they experience. And it's just a unique thing about who they are. You do that for yourself in your head, right? You know when you can drive somewhere with a compass, a road map, or you need navigation. And you determine that. Oh no, I've been there twice. I think I can get there. Okay, well, at what point do you no longer need navigation? New people, with the people I work with, they need navigation. Or one, they're going to get lost, and they're commonly going to take the person I support with them. And it's going to be really hard to get back without that person being in crisis, because they might have unique needs that weren't supported. So that's why I am a big fan of, we look at these processes and we do it for ourselves, but we commonly don't do it for others. I used to use a refrigerator manual as my training tool. And I think it was like a 24-page refrigerator manual. Now, I've had a refrigerator in most every home I've lived in. So I felt pretty secure about how to operate a refrigerator. Yet they were really complex in their 28 pages or whatever it was to get me proactively, that's okay, Brendan, it's perfect, to get me proactively through setting it up, reactively through changing the filter, crisis through troubleshooting, and even gave me an 800 number to call 24 hours a day. Now, I challenge you to find an individual who needs a different level of support, who has a plan as quality as my refrigerator manual. And I think I spent about 900 and something on my refrigerator. Not a very expensive tool when I think about the value of the kids I work with or the young adults I work with. So anyway, that's a soapbox moment. Okay. Any questions about that? All good? All right. The moment you've been waiting for, I hope. The support in the COVID-19 era. So I think the first thing we have to ask ourselves, so why has the pandemic been so difficult for so many? The first thing you have to do is look at yourself and say, what has been the hardest for me? What have I missed the most? How have I tried to offset that? How have I tried to create and get my needs met while still being safe and supportive of the other people in the environment? So we've done everything from, the generics, which we say social distancing and hand washing and wearing masks, and now we're into getting shots. Well, we have to look through this process on how others have experienced these transitions. Were they prepared? Were they unprepared? Do they understand the validity of what we're changing, the whys? Because the only reason most of us do it is when we accept the whys. So I was telling my my young adult class last night, the building independence class last night, as they were detailing why do we wear masks and what should I do when I forget one, and which I think are all the thoughts that a lot of the nonverbal people or limited verbal people I work with experience. And luckily we were able to have a discussion about that. And I said, the bottom line is it's about respect. It's about kindness. It doesn't matter to me your political stand, your belief or not in belief in science. It doesn't matter gender or whether you've been vaccinated or not, or any of those things. It's about how does the person looking at you experience you? So if they have trauma, if they have anxiety, if they have worry about COVID because they don't understand it, and because it was, thrust upon them unknowingly, and they still haven't got all the answers to their questions, well, then I should probably wear a mask when I'm with them because of their fear. One of the young men he worked at a grocery store, and he said, "You don't know how I feel when patrons come in and they're not wearing their mask, and how that scares me and how that worries me." And then, like, that's all I needed to know. All I need to know is that it scares you if I'm not wearing it. Okay, then I can wear it. No big deal. And so when we previously talked about anxiety, again, so many of these individuals experience anxiety, and COVID has given us all anxiety. We've all had things change as a result that we couldn't control and that we weren't prepared for. So it's kind of, one of those things that we can all associate with if we didn't experience it ourselves prior. So I would say I'm starting to experience what isolation was like, right? Because I isolate by choice, because I have freedom to go and see people and talk to people. And all of a sudden I wasn't isolating by choice. And I realized, okay, well, I love isolation as long as it's my decision. I don't like it when someone else is telling me I have to. It becomes much more difficult. Well, isn't that what I do to so many people? I tell them, oh, you have to do this first. Oh, I'm sorry, you got to do that. No, I'm sorry, we can't go there. They can't just hop in the car and go where they want to go. And they can't just, they don't have the same decision-making ability and the power and the choice that I have. And once I had some of that removed, it started to become a little clearer. Friendly reminder. So let's move to the slide, categorical changes. So I know those of you who know me already, I preach this day in and day out. There are 3 categories that I find are essential to everybody's life. At the top of the pyramid is relationship. Those relationships that you have are the most important things. Even sometimes when we overlook them, they are the most important things in your life. So if you can have relationships and that those relationships are healthy and that the people are safe, well, that's your priority. The next one is environment. That your environment is consistent, that your environment isn't in disarray, that you're worried about losing it, that there's trauma in your environment, that you're not safe in your environment, you don't have your basic needs met in your environment. And the last one is schedule and predictability. So knowing what's going to happen, knowing that you have power and choice within that, seeing time in the future. So knowing when you're going to get to see the relationship, that person again, those are all essential parts of our life and what cause us the most stress. Well, the individuals we support are no different. So what I put in the center of the triangle is if you measure somebody in crisis and you try to assess them, you'll commonly find that more than one of these categories has changed on them simultaneously. So think about yourself. On your worst day or your worst experience in life, when you were at your lowest point, were all 3 of these categories being affected? If you think about, going through a divorce or the loss of a loved one, how did that change, first of all, your ability emotionally to engage your environment, to seek help from other relationships, and to maintain a normal schedule and predictability? commonly that'll change everything about your schedule. It's very hard to maintain your normal day-to-day actions when some crisis like that in a relationship has occurred. On the contrary, also our environment can change radically. Hypothetically, through a divorce, well, we move, or we, in a separation, our job changes and we have to change work. Therefore, we have to move. Okay, then our schedule and our predictability changes. Okay, well, now our neighbors are different and we're further away or something from family and friends. So now my mom is a spiritual person, and someone, when I was a kid, she led me down lots of interesting paths, such as biorhythm charts and having my palm read and tarot cards and all of that. And it wasn't to direct me to study or to believe in any of it, but to have an open mind. And the open-mindedness of that for me was to look at this type of scenario and say, well, on a triple critical day on your biorhythm chart, these are the 3 things that are affected. Well, what is the irony in that? Okay, so not something I naturally believed in, but she just said, keep an open mind. Well, that led me here. My triple critical days are actually very measurable. And these are the categories I measure it by. Now, if you're supporting an individual and you know this for a fact, that if I mess with all 3 of these things in their life, I would say if you change one, you should probably call me, because you're probably going to have some behavioral problems and you're probably going to have some issues. And, if you're going to change it, we should probably set it up proactively and we should probably prepare them for the change, right? That's part of the plan. But then you decide, you know what, I'm not only going to change one, we're not going to prepare them, we're going to change 2. I'm like, well, don't call me, you should have done this, you should have done that. Right now we're potentially experiencing a lot of real challenging behavior, and we should have known that we shouldn't have changed 2 at once, right? If we had a choice. And lastly, if we voluntarily change all 3, you're more commonly going to need to call 911 than call anybody. Because if someone doesn't have their support needs met, if someone doesn't have their ability to communicate and self-regulate, and remember we talked about all those functional alternative skills, you're going to send them into crisis if you change all 3, especially if you do it deliberately. So what we do is to try to avoid changing all 3. So how we do that is, the top of the pyramid is the relationships. That's the priority. So if you're going to change a schedule, if you're going to change their predictability, the person who should prepare them and the person who should engage them in that change should be their preferred people. Right? So if you have to go to the dentist today, who should take you? Well, the person you trust the most. Right? So when you teach something new, not just changing their schedule, but you're teaching something challenging, well, the favorite people should be the teacher, because they provide the most trust and support. So anytime you're thinking about changing that schedule and rearranging things, well, you want to do that with the most preferred person. Now, the same goes for environment. If you're going to take them to a new environment, well, who should take them? Ironically, what you do at the previous environment, you should do at the new environment. So you take the familiar, trusted people and you do the familiar, trusted thing in the new environment. So you don't go to the new environment and give them a new activity. You go to the new environment with the trusted people and give them an activity they have already mastered. So they only have to learn the one thing. They only have to adapt to the one categorical change. Now, if you're going to introduce a new person, you introduce the new person in the familiar, comfortable environment in a schedule and predictability that they can do all by themselves.
There's a question in the chat box that kind of relates to what you just said. It says, relationship is the hardest one to help navigate as support people tend to be like water. How do you support that fact?
Marla, when you say people, meaning people are fluid, that they come and go?
Yeah, I'm thinking about care providers, job coaches, Special Olympic coaches, all the support people in a social world tend to be very fluid. If you get a year out of a lot of them, you've done well. And yet, so that's the one part in this triangle that for me is very hard to support, because it tends then to be me that you're talking about, and I'm a singular person and can't be all those things to him at all the time.
Right.
So I don't know how to support. So obviously when I can't do it, somebody else has to do it. It's a new person in a new environment. Now I've just kind of cut my own throat, so to speak.
Right. So the easy answer, right? My cop-out answer, because Marla, you and I know each other so well, I can do this to you. My cop-out answer is actually what you do is you make the environment so strong and so predictable, and you make the schedule and the routine so predictable that the people become a little easier to transition in and out. So, because we know, I call support people transient, that they come and go. It's like they hopped on the train and they went to the next city. The challenge behind all of that, and I think I may have included that in one of these slides, is with new people, we have to, give them a sense of closure when they leave, some sense of predictability. So Marla, you have actually done a good job of, like, some of the people in your son's past still do Zoom with him, even though they live far away. So it's not like later it'll say, it's not like they just showed up on a milk carton someday and disappeared, right? Although some of them do. But the challenge is, how do you communicate the relationship value and how to choose those people, that he can trust in his life, that he'll still have a way to communicate with them, still have a connection, and still have some predictability around that relationship. Now, understandably so, predictability around a late relationship is also telling them this person's moving and you'll never see him again. I mean, at least that gives predictability. Whereas, this person's going to come back, and this person, you can Zoom with, this person you can write letters to. What are the concrete aspects of the relationship that can add to the schedule and the predictability? So because I know Marla and her son, she's doing that by saying, oh, this person you're going to have on the Zoom call on Sunday, or this person you're going to see on Tuesday. Even though those aren't necessarily the people that are in your life every day, there's still going to be transient people in all of our lives, as long as we're concrete about who those people are. And again, speaking specifically to your son, he does morph to new preferred people. He still likes all his old people, but he does seem to find a favorite of the new people. So go ahead, Marla, I see your hand up.
In this triangle, Zach, what I wonder about when you say to let them know that it's predictable that they will be gone, doesn't that leave a seed of anxiety that now you've just set the preset of now I'm going to be anxious because this person may not come tomorrow, or this may next week may be in, so I'm now already angsted out.
Well, I guess to be specific, what I think is the occurrence is that when people experience so many changes in their relationships, that anxiety is already there. It's already an underlying part of who they are, that they've experienced so many more people come and go in their lives than many their age, that the worry is that their favorite people are going to leave, right? So they worry about the people they love and trust, and that would be family and the preferred friends. The weird ones like us who stay together, you know, in some capacity, those are the ones they worry the most about. The other ones, I think they do categorize as these people come and go. Because if, say, every job coach you've ever had is left, well, what do you think about the new one? You may really like them, but your expectation is they'll go. Because none of them have stayed. And I'm just using that as an example. That doesn't mean the same for everyone you guys support. But I'm just saying as an example, if there's a category of people, you know, I used to go to school and now I don't go to school, so I don't see any of them anymore. They're all gone. Now, most all of us experience that. But we didn't have all the other relationship trauma involved, you know, because we had more control over it. So it's not all about just the radical experiences in relationships. It's also that we can follow up. You know, when people leave that we don't like, we're kind of happy. And they have the same experience. So they're hoping that some people leave. And that we who maybe hired them usher them along. And they tend to be really good communicators to us of that one needs to go. However, they also have favorites. And, you know, those relationships are their favorite people. And yeah, they worry about them. They have that anxiety. And there's not a ton you can do about that because we worry about that. It's just how do you magnify the relationship for quality so that when that relationship might part ways, that they'll at least have a way to connect. That they'll have a way to Zoom, and they'll have a way to Snapchat, they'll have a way to follow them on Facebook or Instagram or whatever tools that they're, you know, available to using. Honestly, it's way better today than it was 20 years ago when it was only phone calls and letter writing. So we do have a lot more tools at our disposal. It's, are those individuals really invested and are they willing to do it? And part of, I always say part of my job is helping people understand the likability of the people we support and love, is to show them, I mean, really show them off, to say, look at how fun this person is. Look at how much they care. And the more I give their backstory, like this right here, of, you know, they've had so many people leave and it really hurts them, that, you know, if you're going to commit to this for a year, I would like you to at least consider, you know, doing Zoom or doing phone or doing whatever it is that you can do. and to me, that, you know, that's one of the pieces of the puzzle, and making sure there's enough people who care, who are invested, you know, whether that be in one of these relationship crises, you know, because those will happen. We know that. And that's why you set up the structure and the predictability in the environment, so that someone else needs to step in that also cares about them. It can work. Because, you know, we know that that's a reality. And that's the proactive piece. Is, are there people who could step in an emergency to fill in the relationship piece because I've got the structure, predictability, and environment in check. It's in place. So again, yeah, there's a handful of priority people in all of our lives. And so we're not interchangeable, but we become a little more interchangeable when we do the other two really well. All right.
There's another question. If a new environment is a parent's house they don't want to go to, should that environment be eliminated?
You know, I wouldn't say eliminated, because to me it's rash. And if it's eliminated, trust me, that person will do it. So first thing is we do have to listen to them, and what their needs are and however they communicate it, whether that's behavior or language or what have you. But again, the thing we have the most control over changing is the environment. So it doesn't mean that it has to be eliminated, but it likely means it has to be augmented, adjusted, and changed. So it's hard for me to point, you know, to one specific in the general question. But again, if the structure and predictability is in one environment and it's working, that structure and predictability needs to be adopted by the other environment. because what works works, and most often it will cross environments as long as it's supported and taught. So if it's a child or an adult and they, move from, work to home, or from, parent to parent, or from school to home, as long as the predictability and schedule is pretty solid and the environmental triggers are removed, most likely they're going to be successful as long as they're cared for, right? Again, they're good assessors of human behavior. So if the relationship they're in is one of quality, then usually you can get through any of those things. So I don't know that I answered the question exactly well because it's quite philosophical, but I would certainly do an environmental assessment first. And I would transfer all the things that work in the other environment to it while you do that. So again, when you go to another environment, you have to initially put that stuff in place for them to be successful most of the time. And now, granted, I wrote this categorical change specifically for people on the autism spectrum, but I wrote this for me, right? And I don't qualify under every category. So the reality is this is all of us, that we need all of these things to be successful. When you start a new job, you go, well, what I did at my old job, and they're like, well, we don't know that we want to hear that. But that's what worked for you. So you want to take it and put it in the new environment. But maybe that wasn't why you were hired, even though that's what makes you feel comfortable. Why? Well, because you just changed environment and relationship. So the one thing you might carry with you is schedule and predictability. So you do it naturally yourself. We just often don't think about it. Again, we just operate. And most of the individuals we support, can't tell you this is what I'm doing. I need this to be the same, and that's why I'm freaking out. You just move my environment and move me with a different person, and of course I'm freaking out because I don't have my schedule either. So they often tell us with behavior, not saying what I'm missing. I'm missing this, I'm missing that, please make it happen. Let's move on to the pandemic experiences and supports. So we know that all of us need some level of structure and predictability. And the pandemic took most of that away from us. Many of you might have had a similar experience that I had, and you started to try to create an oasis as best you could. You tried to make a better, Zoom location. You tried to make a better backyard. You tried to make maybe you painted a wall or two. Maybe you organized a closet, but you tried to create more structure and predictability just to fill the time and be more comfortable being at home, most often. I did a lot of that. And so that was my pandemic experience. I started to create an environment that was much more comfortable for me. The ability to manage unstructured time. When we are changing our schedule, whether we're not going to work or school or out to the community or to the gym or whatever it is that was taken away from us, we had to fill all this time that we used to be able to fill. And so the individuals that we support have to have the ability to deal with and make structure themselves. And if they don't do it, we have to do it for them. So if they don't know how to manage their unstructured time, I will say my own son, who's had a lot of experience, 17-year-old neurotypical, experiences anxiety and depression. For him, video games, right? And how do you tell someone don't do that when you don't have something to replace it with? And when it's on your phone as well as devices in the house, it can be done at any chair in the entire building. And it's easy. I mean, how many of you have, I call it, phone alert system. You have to pick it up and look at it just for the sake of picking it up and looking at it. It's a routine. And so if you have nothing else to do, you pick it up and look at it. If you pick it up and look at the news every time, we were looking at bad news. So our routine became negativity. Reading about negativity, experiencing negativity, creating fear and anxiety, worry, right? So here's one of the things I just watched recently. Maybe you've seen this. So this is about a 12, 14 ounce glass of water. Now, I can hold this very light item for quite a while. Now, if this is a glass of worry, I can worry for about an hour until my arm's getting really tired. Well, how long until I do one of two things? Maybe three things. I could drop it, which I clearly don't want to do. I could drink it and have it forever, or I can put it down. Now, if I put down my worry, what do? I have to do something, don't I? Because the worry is still right here in front of me, staring at me. So just putting it down doesn't put it away. I have to redirect myself. I have to create a new schedule. It's nice when I can go get busy and forget I poured myself a glass of worry. And I just go pour it out of the sink and get a fresh, clean one. But the bottom line is you have to do something else, whether that is exercise to eliminate the worry for a duration of time, because now you're more prepared to drink the worry. It becomes more necessary that you've done something to change your routine, to put it away, to knock some things off your to-do list, to go outside, change a venue. But that's naturally how we deal with worry. You drink it and hold it forever, or you put it down and you go do something else. And hopefully you can problem solve it when you're done. So that all becomes that ability to adapt to change. So when we take away our structure, it's easier to sit and worry. And that's the same thing that happened to the people you love and support. If you took away all of their activities, they didn't have a lot of other things to structure their time. So maybe they increased, self-stimulation or picking or pacing or obsessive compulsive rituals or, just genuine angst because they didn't know how to fill their time in a structured, predictable, comfortable way. Because maybe the environment and we had been doing it for them prior to the pandemic. And likewise ourselves. So one of the things that was mentioned is also when we're talking about changing environments, there has to be support people compatibility and consistency. So whether we're removing some support people who provided certain things that individual no longer has, or we're, sharing duties, say with, co-parenting, there has to be some level of compatibility and consistency because we're filling a time that was otherwise filled with something completely different. And when you miss that and you lose that, you can't have more friction within your life. So what happens is we historically take away the things that might have been working and we add more friction. We add more difficulty. One is because all of us were struggling. Because we were in the same boat and we were trying to figure it out for ourselves. And yet we had the responsibility to do it for others first. That is a very difficult task, of which I experienced in my own home. So it has been a learning process on compatibility and consistency and how to support people and knowing that everyone who lives in the house needs something different, yet the same categories. So how are the previous transitions? So think about historically during other times when the individual you support had to go through a change, whether that be a change in school or a change in work or a change in provider or a change in, bus transportation or whatever it was historically. How did those previous transitions go? What worked for those transitions, and how are we going to apply those as we try to transition them back into, a more routine, predictable society? We're trying to get them back to work, trying to get them back to school, trying to get them back to, the gym. I know lots of back to dances and back to, there's so many outlets. I mean, I can't wait to just go to Saturday market or just because I want to do something. But how am I going to experience it once I go back? It's going to be different. Some people need more preparation than I do. I might just be elated and not care. So preparation for changes in the schedule. So how do we prepare people for things? Well, first of all, you have to understand their anxiety and some of the things that worry them. Right? So if it is, the actual catching of COVID, well, then they have to know as much as they can about how to maintain their health and safety and how to adjust accordingly, how to understand personal space when personal space may not have been a strength to begin with. Brenda and I, before you guys logged on, were talking about an individual that I support. And, one of the things he does or enjoys doing is going to the Goodwill bin store. And we go to the Goodwill bin store and we had to learn to wear a mask and wear gloves and socially distance. And we had to wait outside in the cold for our opportunity to go in. So we had to count people who were coming out. We had to not go up and talk to people and ask for help that we would have otherwise done because we tended to invade space. There were so many rules that we had to learn to be successful. Now, that was not the job I signed up for with this young man because it wasn't an issue when we met. But now it's like, oh gosh, I think I do need to take you to your fun place because we've got a lot to work on there. We've got a lot to learn there. That becomes not just somewhere maybe that your run-of-the-mill provider could take him to, because there's so many more details. So he needed the relationship to deal with the change in his schedule and predictability, even though we went to a familiar environment. But that's why it was successful. Because we only changed the rules of the environment. The environment was the same, and I was the same. I was the one who took him there in the first place. So then we trained a provider to take him. Then we had COVID. Then we started over because it's a whole new set of rules. So, but in looking at past transitions, we had to take how we learned to teach him those things previously. And again, this is a nonverbal person who uses multimodality visuals, voice output system, very primitive visual PEX schedule. Yet we just implemented all of these things, social stories, to tell him what he had to do, gave him, added to his visual list of preparation to leave the house. So checking your backpack, knowing that you have extra masks, knowing that you have extra gloves, knowing that you have the visual that tells you what 6 feet of distance looks like. Reviewing that, practicing it before we went out into the community and maybe triggered somebody else's anxiety because he is such a personable person. One of the biggest benefits, he's very caring and he wants to be with you and talk to you. But that didn't work right then. You don't need to go touch people and shake their hand. It's not what they want. Well, how come that changed? So those whys have to be there. It's not just no. You can't just tell people no, you got to teach them why. Safety adjustments. So that's kind of an example of a lot of those safety adjustments. And then of course, fears of disease, symptoms, shots. I've had a lot of teaching around the vaccination. So many people that I support are worried about the vaccination. Like Marla. Yeah. But, and her son. And so a lot of discussion and a lot of visuals and a lot of videotaping of people, myself and preferred people, getting vaccinations and showing them, what the signs and symptoms are of the, breaking down the risk in a T-chart. Here's the risk if you don't get it. Here's the risk if you do get it. To help them make that decision so it's not so, painful and tragic and worrisome, that when their decision is made, that it's easy for them to get. All of those types of things. So there's been a ton, and I don't think that's different. I think all of us, who support our friends and family and loved ones experience the same thing. A lot of us differ on vaccinations and whether we're ready or whether we're worried, etc. And then how to do it. So you go back to the triangle. Well, if the person's triggered by going to the medical location, well, then is there a at-home area where you can be in a safe environment and put it on their schedule so that those safe people can be there? Because those safe people may not be able to go in right now because you can't take all the providers in, now into doctors' offices. So all of those changes, if you can't explain them and they can't meet the needs of the person, well, then we have to find ways to adapt and educate in a different way. And again, like I said Wednesday, it's added a lot of new challenges. And even though I don't necessarily love them, it's certainly stimulating our brain of how to do things different and how to support people better. So I'm Cindy, I'm looking at your post here. Yes, absolutely. And getting blood draws and I've even shown people different types of needles, because if they get used to blood draws, well, that's actually easier than a shot, because shots are quicker, more painless, and much finer a needle. So we look at the difference between, say, needles and nails. It's like, this is the size difference. This is what we're going to use, not this. And giving some clarity, visual clarity to the differences. Of course, I'm very fortunate because my wife's a nurse who actually gives vaccinations and does COVID testing. So I have access to a lot of information that has been helpful, and some aid in prioritization of, let's say, changing the system of how we provide it to people with unique needs. So that's been helpful for a lot of the people I know here locally, to be able to get those things done. So, and great, Cindy, I'm so glad to hear the vaccine was easy for him. But it's because you went through all the trouble those 10 years with the blood draw. That's the preparation, that's the teaching, and that's where you go back to how have we taught these different things around medical in the past. And that's what becomes, essential tools. Brenda, let's move on to the next slide. This is a slide I've used since the dawn of time, and relationships are key. So when you're talking about new and different providers, the first one I say is they have to like them. They have to like the person. I don't want them if you don't like them. And likewise, I don't want them if, the person I like doesn't like them. So it doesn't work. So that it may seem simple, but it's real. And I'm sure most of you have all experienced this. If there isn't a true caring for one another, it's not going to work for any real duration of time. The next one is you have to say yes, and not no all the time. So instead of when you can't say yes, well, then you say yes when. There's very few things in life that you have to say no to, right? I mean, even if they're running into the street to get on a bus, you have to tell them when they can get on the bus. Those are the experiences. They're waiting maybe for something to do. And so maybe they're bolting. It's like, well, if I don't have a way to tell you when we can do that, well, no wonder you're doing it. It's similar to, fighting for, getting out of the swimming pool or what have you. I don't want to leave the fair, or I don't want to leave my auntie's house, or I don't want to leave Goodwill, or I don't want to leave wherever because I don't know when I get to come back. So you have to tell me yes, when. It's okay, we'll do this again next Friday. Oh, okay. And then you have to follow through on that. You have to, use the validity of that. And the last one is building trust. And that becomes the truth piece. Trust has to be there. So I'm working with someone else right now who struggles if you're a minute late. The time is 100%. It's concrete. And so because that's not reality in life for people, I've started to do video chat with him So I'll schedule for, say, 1 o'clock. And then I'll video chat saying I'm running late and this is what I'm doing. And I promise I'm coming because, and of course, then I try to only be a minute or two late. And we're working up to, right now, we're working on a half an hour late. Because now, like one time it was the snowstorm, right? And people were having trouble getting places. So we had to start practicing for some of these delays. All the way to, you know what, we can't come today. No one can get out. No one can go. But we can phone chat. And again, I'm talking about someone who's nonverbal. But it doesn't mean he doesn't have the same needs. Just because he can't talk back to me directly in verbal language doesn't mean he doesn't want to see and hear that I'm alive. And that I care about him and I can't wait to get there. But I got a foot of snow and it's not safe. So there's those kinds of things that's all part of relationship development. That's why we worry about the whole milk carton issue, right? About, oh, they're not coming, they're gone, they're in a ditch somewhere. I know some of you who know me, I call my wife WCS, worst case scenario. You're 1 minute late, you must be dead in the hospital. So knowing anxiety affects people, we have to build the trust and we have to teach them that, you know what, I'm not in a ditch somewhere. I had to stop and get gas. And here's a video of me stopping and getting gas. And I'm thinking about you and everything's going to be wonderful when I get there. And as crazy as it sounds, it works. Because it's mutual respect. And that's maybe what was missing the whole time. I can't just text somebody's parents and say, hey, I'm running late. Sometimes I have to call them directly and say, hey, I'm alive. I'm coming. I promise. Look where I'm at. Here's a video. Ironically, they save those in a file, which is hilarious, and laugh at me when I'm out in a snowstorm showing them how bad it is, because that stuff actually is funny. It's like watching the weatherman who's, struggling in the wind. So I found that actually now it becomes a topic of conversation. It's remember when, because I have video of that. And now we talk about, oh, remember when the storm was? Well, here's the video of you in the storm. And that's how he brings it up. Didn't have a tool for that before. So it actually has become multifaceted. Just another, another positive outcome of a strategy that we use for something else. So, and I want to try to get through some of these before we get to some questions. So relationship supports. One is you have to control your own stress. So control your own stress around COVID. You have to be doing all the things for yourself that you want to do for the person you care about. I know it's very cliche to say, but if you're not doing it, you're not a good support person. You're not as healthy. You're not, taking care of yourself, and it's virtually impossible to do it for somebody else if you're not in that mind state. Next one is think and speak very positively. So even around COVID, I'm not talking about the, hundreds of thousands of people or millions of people across the world that have passed away. I have to focus on, well, who do we know who's gotten through it? So I try to show the demonstration of, yes, reality, those are going on, but you've been very fortunate and you're doing very well. And also giving them the cognitive behavior therapy approach of, hypothetically, you're a young person also, and young people are very fortunate is that it tends not to affect you as much. So trying to give them some statistics and some stories and some video and some information about what it's like for different people, and maybe some stories of success and not just negativity, but also I don't lie to them. I share reality, that this is what we're doing because we don't want bad things to happen. Show confidence and write and draw it. Same with masks. I drew up a lot of different social stories for different individuals around mask wearing. One that I thought was kind of funny was a kid I didn't think wanted to go to school. When we showed him that because he wasn't wearing his mask, he could only come 2 hours a week, he started trying to wear a mask. Not because, well, before he would have hated coming to school, but now he's been at home for a year. He's pretty happy coming to school. He would like to be there more often because at least it's a variable. At least it's a change. So now I've got him up to 17 minutes a day wearing a mask. And he's got huge sensory issues, but he's working on it. And we've tried every type of mask and we drew out what it is. And, we realized that when he decided to try it more intensely was when we said, well, we could have you here more often if you'd wear it. But, it's creating an environment. You could be with the other kids if you wear your mask. But when you won't wear a mask, I can't take you with the other kids. And that was all he needed, was the relationship support of, oh, okay, well, I'll battle this horrible sensory thing I'm experiencing with this nasty mask so that I can be with you guys and the kids. It wasn't about, oh, I want to do math so bad. It was, I really want to just come here and see you guys. So provide true, clear, and reassuring information. Again, key, true, but I try not to make it too horribly ominous. Avoid blaming. So I try not to blame, who gave it to who or where did it come from or any of those things around COVID. It just is what it is. I don't blame people for not wearing masks. I just, talk about, people having bad days or people who have been given information that might not be helpful for their decision making in that. I just try to give them information and not blame them for having different ideas. Show what they can control. So when you feel like there's a bunch of things out of control, all of us start to gravitate towards controlling things that we can. And that is just a inherent piece of what anxiety does. So when you think about all the different phobias of the world, I think the easiest one we're all familiar with would be like germophobia, where people obsessively wash their hands and how that links to COVID-19. So how all of these real obsessive rituals might increase around this time. So we have to recognize it for what it is. When we've changed a lot of things in all three categories, we're going to see a lot of that, need for control to go up. And unfortunately, a lot of their control can be very self-damaging or perseverative in a negative mental way, which then inhibits their ability to transition out of it, to get back to where we want to be, as we transition in Washington in phase 3. So that's a new thing for them to say, well, how do I undo all of these obsessive routines I've created to get back to where I was in the past? Share other issues where they have survived. So think about the other things that they have conquered and give them visual reminders. And again, we go back to those visual reminders because they can be the same, regardless of who's going over it with them. So if a social story or a visual list or a video is a perpetuation of their obsessive need or control, that they look at it every time and it's the same. Every time I turn to the third page, every time I get to the third minute in the video, every time I get to the third scene, every time I get to the third on the list and the T-chart, it's the same. So no matter what provider I'm with or whatever environment I'm in, it's the same. That gives them some control over these, craziness that they're experiencing in this world. And then, of course, compare that to what they've accomplished. So don't dwell on the things that are causing them duress. Dwell on the things that they've already tackled. Look at how well you did staying home. And now you can get back to, remember when you used to go to work 6 days a week? Remember when you used to be able to, get carts at the grocery store and not be afraid of, them being sanitized? Think about all the things you've done and you can do that again. And then lastly, as I think it was Alicia brought up earlier, was the cognitive behavior therapy and how to tailor that for the individual. It is an essential tool to really show and reiterate all of the different strategies that cognitive behavior therapy offers. And it is hand in hand for most individuals who experience anxiety, depression, autism, Rett syndrome, which used to be, again, many, many moons ago on the autism spectrum, which was, as we've started to delineate characteristics and things differently. But so it is really supportive for most people. even us. Don't think it's separate. It's helpful for us. So we talked about changing support people. Marla did a great job of bringing that up. And how do we prepare the individual for changing support people? Knowing that we're going to do it in the familiar environment and under a familiar schedule. And this also includes, Marla, for your benefit, I loved the story she sent me the other day of her son who was able to go to work and do his job and follow his routine and schedule, even when the support person didn't show up on time, which is a testament to the system and his ability. Even though I'm sure he couldn't wait for that person to show up, and he was probably worried that they weren't going to, and he's probably now testing and worried because they're such a wonderful person. He wants them there every time, and he's probably asking about that and making sure, if I'm correct, nod your head. Yeah, I figured he might be, because yeah, after the wonderful story, I'm like, okay, where's this going to lead for him? The same place it leads for us. When somebody who's preferred doesn't show up, it's the same place. Are they okay? Is this going to happen again? Do I need to worry? Do I need to reassess? How do I prove that this won't happen? How do I get assurance?
It was all orchestrated.
It was all orchestrated in what way?
The whole thing has been orchestrated. As far as, I can't talk about it, listening ears, but it was.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But all of, yeah. So preparing for new support people is similar to preparing for no support people. It's that phase out process. All of that has to be orchestrated or choreographed. So how do we prepare? We use photos, we use social stories and other manners which provides that person the information they need. Of, a calendar of when that person will be present and when they're not. When they don't show, what is the routine? How do we replace when some preferred person doesn't show with something that's also really awesome, even though, it may not be that person? So is there a place we can go to visit somebody you really like if that person doesn't show up? Or, can we do a video with that person? Are there videos in the past that are ways that we can reinforce the fact that, yeah, sometimes this happens and I get sick or I get caught in a snowstorm, but I will see you next week. And remember, those videos have already been created and they've kept their word in the past. Structure activities that the person already has mastered and has routine for completing. So when that new person comes, where do you insert new person into preferred activity that person already enjoys? And that they really could do it without the new person. So as there's change, how do you insert new person into their life rather than inserting them into new person's experiences or new person's preferences? So lastly on this one is perform activity in the environment, of course, that's familiar with the individual. So how do we, go through that? And I'm sure COVID has offered a lot of transitions for people's schedules and ability to come and exposure. And, I won't be able to make it because I was around somebody who tested positive. I mean, I've experienced it myself. And it's really hard to, put people in those positions without having other backup tools designed. So I've been trying to design a lot of backup tools that also will help for their reintroduction. Their return, because now when you see that some of these strategies are effective, you can now proactively use them for the upcoming change. Which, I think whenever you're presented with a difficult challenge like we have been, we come up with new ideas for which to meet that challenge. And we find that those ideas transfer to different people in different environments that we didn't otherwise plan to use them for. So it's just like going back to school for me, I think. Again, it's a whole new learning curve for a bunch of different individuals and ideas of what works for them and how do you tweak them and individualize it. The guiding principle we're using is remember that effective support is one of our best behavior management tools. You have to have active engagement. And that's a hard thing during COVID is, when people weren't causing, issues, we let them alone. Because there were so many issues for which to tackle. Oh, I have to learn how to order groceries online, or, oh, I have to learn how to do Zoom. And there's so many of these unique experiences that we had to adapt to that, if the person we care about is just not causing problems, well, guess what? We left them to their own devices. That's just the natural outcome. So we also have to have, positive reinforcement, and it may come up with thinking outside of the box, something new and something different. But sometimes just the places that we preferred opening back up again is like a whole new level of positive reinforcement. But we have to be prepared for what changes are presented for which to go to those locations. My favorite word is intentional support person behavior. To me, that just emulates proactivity. So if you and your other support people are being intentional about what they do, you're not being reactionary, you're being planful, you're organized, you're teaching and not responding. Thus, you don't have to worry about the last one as much as safety, and providing safety in the COVID era is something they have to feel to return back to the environment. So if they're not experiencing safety, even just because they've been at home for so long, that it's hard to just leave the door. It's hard to get back into a car or a bus or go somewhere. We have to make sure they feel safe. So maybe the duration of time in which you spend out might get minimized at first, and you slowly ease them back in. You provide added supports, and you allow them an opt-out clause. It's like, okay, I got to go now. I did it for 10 minutes. I got to go. We're finished. And to be able to listen that, you don't have to use your behavior to, make change, that I can listen in whatever way you need to tell me. And I will respond accordingly for you. Well, and obviously I'm going to run over and over and over, and I don't want to do that. So there's always so much to discuss in this process. We were getting into communication. I was going to break down every one of these categories. So we started with relationships. We're going to get into environment and structure and predictability, and how to apply all of those different things in order to return. But I'm afraid we're running out of time. I did talk to Darla, who said we will likely be able to offer some more of these, some continuations. If you have new ideas for topics, we'd love to hear those. Please send that information, and we'll try to just keep following up and doing more of these kinds of opportunities to connect and brainstorm. But I want to leave at least these 10 minutes just to talk. So are you guys okay with me we shutting down the PowerPoint, and if there's any